We are back.
Yes, we are.
Marathon Minute, episode 27.
Calen Carr.
Calen Carr. We got a great episode, and this is actually take two. We just recorded an entire intro without the microphones on. We're still learning, but also I think that intro is a bit too long, and this episode is quite lengthy, so we're going to keep this short.
Very short.
There's no weekend update this week because we're recording this midweek. We know how you guys love the weekend update, big part of the show.
I get swamped sometimes with people's compliments on the weekend update. They love that segment. They want to know what's going on in our lives.
It's fun. No, I think it's important to bring that to the whole picture. But this is an amazing episode. Oh, also, before we get to Calen Carr, we did have a bit of a different episode last week. Roots on Road, episode 1.
Yeah, and let me I was not part of that, but I want to compliment you on it.
I'm sorry.
No worries. That was not a dig. It was a observation, but another observation was I thought it was really a very interesting, good, fun idea to, while you're on the road with your mates, right, your teammates on the routes, to sit down and just kind of shoot the breeze with them, not really interview them, but just kind of talk about life as a footballer.
Yeah. I think it was really cool as well. And I think we're just kind of scratching the surface of it. I mean, one of the reasons we started the show was to show kind of the human side of all of us. And I feel like professional athletes, especially at times, get dehumanized and you don't really see kind of what they go through kind of on the inside. And so I think that was a really cool opportunity to hear some really awesome stories. Thanks again to the guys that participated. And I'm really looking forward to doing more of those in the future. And maybe we'll conference call you in. I think that'd be
or take me on the road with you. I don't have a problem with that. Just tell the Roots you need an extra hotel room for your dad.
I think you may need to cover the travel expenses, but hey, I mean, you've traveled to a lot of games in the past. So I wouldn't put it past you, honestly. I could only imagine all of us in the room and you're just in there as well.
I would totally do that. You kidding me?
I know.
I love that stuff.
I know.
I live for that stuff. And you know what? Your teammates are really interesting. They all have diverse backgrounds. They're from different countries, different parts of the world, different, in terms of paths to their professional soccer career. It's really interesting to hear.
Yeah, I got some amazing teammates for sure. Shout out to the squad.
Yeah.
But let's talk a little bit about the episode, but not give too much away because we literally do talk about it all. And Calen Carr is someone who I've connected with a bit recently, but he's someone who, when I speak with him, it really feels like we're speaking the same language. And it's different than other conversations. I really look up to him and his career path, the way he's transitioned from an MLS career to a career in media and doing some other really cool things within the space. It was just really cool to, get to talk with him at such length and in such detail about his story.
It was fun for me watching you and Calen kind of have your interchange, because sitting back and watching you guys talk, I could see that you have very common interests. You have very common goals. You taking very common paths. There's a lot of parallels between, and he's a bit ahead of you, right? He's about 10 years older than you.
Yeah.
So?
I mean, a little anecdote, which we actually talk about in the pod, but I grew up watching Calen play college soccer at Cal.
Go Bears.
Go Bears. And Calen played college soccer at Cal. He was an All-American. He's actually a Hall of Famer, which my dad was at his induction ceremony, which is a cool fun fact.
Correct.
I guess we should, get to his bio a little bit. He was drafted 10th overall by the Chicago Fire, had an 8-year MLS career, then went on to do media work for the MLS and has since done a ton of cool producing, hosting. He now has another podcast that he's launched. He is featured on various podcasts as one of the co-hosts, I believe, with the MLS, but this is a solo project, which I highly recommend. It's super cool, called 94 Til Infinity with Calen Carr, which we go into detail talking about in the episode. But the guy has done so many cool things post-career and
all over the world.
Yeah, all over the world. And I think he's just getting started. Also just named head of brand at For Soccer Ventures. So, like a lot of our guests, doing a lot of cool things at once, and has an unbelievable story path to getting there. One of those parallels, we're both East Bay natives. I was born in Berkeley, raised in Oakland. He was born in Oakland, raised in Berkeley. But yeah, enough of us. Let's get to this amazing conversation. Episode 27, brought to you by Cafe Fanny Granola.
And I was supposed to say that.
That was your line?
Yeah.
We switched.
Still the best granola I've ever had.
Yeah.
And probably will ever have.
That's a statement.
Too bold, you think?
Never.
Okay. It's good stuff. You got to try it if you haven't. And if you have tried it, you know I'm right.
Yeah, you know.
You know.
Okay.
Okay.
Calen Carr.
Marathon Minute.
Let's go.
Hey, Calen, I'm Michael. Mike, Max's dad.
Great to meet you.
Yeah.
You guys may have met in the past, though.
We
I
have.
was gonna say, okay.
No, but you wouldn't remember. But I remember because it was at your Hall of Fame, your Cal Hall of Fame induction.
Oh, cool.
At the ceremony, my wife and I, my wife's Barry, Max's mom.
Also a Cal Hall of Famer.
No way. Wait,
Yeah.
I think you may have told me this before.
Yeah, tennis player.
So we've, for a bunch of years of not everyone, but we typically go to the Hall of Fame induction ceremony because it's just cool. It's a cool ceremony, right?
Totally.
And my wife gets to stand up with the Hall of Famers, which once a year she really likes. And so we were at your induction. And,
no way. Oh, that's so cool.
Afterwards, my wife was saying, boy, that Calen Carr, he seemed like a really cool dude. And you were dressed hip. You got the skinny stuff going on and you were looking very, very cool. She was saying, why can't you dress like that, Michael? And she made it a point to go up to you and introduce herself. And I was kind of in the background and tell you, my son plays soccer. So
that's awesome.
So we met. It was very brief, and it was you were getting a lot of attention that night.
That's wild.
Yeah. So good to see you again, Calen. And thank you. Thank you for
the Cal hat too.
He likes to tailor his outfits to our guests. So
I love that.
We had a stylist on and he wore a flannel, which was a interesting decision to really show off his style. But yeah, we like to cater to our guests. First and foremost, thank you, bro. Like this has been a long time coming, but I'm glad we finally got you. Wouldn't want to be spending Easter doing anything else, honestly. Before we get into you and all that you are doing, all that you've done, how you've gotten to be where you are. But I do want to give more of some personal context of, we talk about us being a Cal family. My dad's wearing the hat. I grew up him taking me to your college games. And I significantly remember, your name, Calen Carr, and watching you play. You were a hell of a college player at the time. And I was probably, I don't know how old, I don't know what our age difference is, but I was probably somewhere between 8 and 14. So a very impressionable age, And so I remember watching you play, and I used to think like the Cal soccer team was like hot shit. Like, these guys are like the coolest guys. And so, I followed your career a little bit once you played professionally. And then more recently, as I've kind of gotten interested in the media space and I've been playing in the roots and into more creative things, I've seen you because you operate in a similar space. And so it's been really cool now it's a very cool full circle moment. I like to kind of recognize these moments where now here we are having you on the podcast, and it's not like me being a 10-year-old watching you at a game being starstruck, but we can have a conversation somewhat as peers. And that's pretty damn cool in my opinion. And, I just want to give some context to like, I watched you play as a kid and now we're talking on a podcast. And also a little bit more context. Apologize for the rant. After this, the floor is yours. But I reached out to you on social media a while back because I saw you'd been doing some stuff with the Roots. So I'm like, oh, we're, one connection away. And I reached out via social media because I really like what you're doing and the space that you operate in. We went to Gordo's and chopped it up at Gordo's, which was awesome. Good times, great burritos. And then I went to New York a few months later. You were a great host. We went out to dinner, grabbed some drinks, linked up there. And so, well, one, I just appreciate you giving me that time. But two, like that was, I'm hoping, but it's cool for me to see these relationships evolve from me watching you as a kid to now having conversations about the spaces that we operate in. And so I want to talk a bit about, we both grew up in the Bay playing soccer. So we have a lot of similar experiences, but I kind of want to start with right now. We'll jump around a little bit time wise, but recently you just accepted a new position, and you also, I talked about peers. You're also competition. You just launched a podcast as well. So let's talk about the podcast first. 94 Til Infinity with Calen Carr. I've only been able to listen to the first episode. Is there only one episode available, or am I having tech issues?
Okay. No, you got it. We chose to make the most difficult type of podcast that you possibly can do, as far as just like a lot of writing.
Well, it's incredible.
Research.
So I understand why, like the production and all the, you mentioned research, the amount of information that you get. And then from a production standpoint, like I listened to it, I was like, holy shit, like this is so much better than ours, is how it's produced and how it sounds.
That's just different.
It's different, but I'm really excited to see that project evolve. Can you just talk a little bit about the inspiration behind starting it? Because I know you've done podcast work in the past where you're more talking about current, kind of the day-to-day in global soccer events. So could you just talk a little bit about the inspiration behind the project and, how it's been going?
Well, yeah, but first I got to address, just thanks for showing me some love on the in the introduction. And I think the part you're bringing up about both being from the Bay, East Bay specifically, and growing up and being soccer players, and like it's really cool to hear that I may have inspired you, or that you remember those days at all. And like I feel like that's a really unique thing about the Bay Area, and like people say it, but if you're not from the Bay, you might not fully understand it. But I had a bunch of guys that did that for me. I remember this guy, Kim Tai Simpson and Shawnee Simpson from San Francisco Seals, and CJ Brown played for the Seals, who I got to play with in Chicago for the Fire. And like, these guys were my trainers at one point when I was like a kid. But next thing I know, I was like training with the Seals, who were like this legendary A-League team that made these incredible runs to the US Open Cup, and they let me train with them. And I like have stayed in touch, and those guys have been just like mentors for me. So I think there's this idea of like, if you're from the Bay, you got to look out for people from the Bay. And I just see the way you're moving and playing, and also getting involved in media, and it just is such a really great thing to see. And so of course I was going to meet up and, go to especially for Gordo's, right? Yeah. Like you have to do it.
Anyone asked you to go to Gordo's, you would have been there. Let's be real.
Yeah. And then like your family connection and the Berkeley connection, and that, those were often my heroes too when I was coming up. And I mean, I remember some of them were soccer players, but also some of them were like, I remember seeing Jason Kidd and Tony Gonzalez play at the old Harmon gym. So it's like that, those are kind of like, I just think that there's some cool symmetry there, as far as like, and it's cool to hear that there's this whole new wave of next generation people who are younger, or soccer players, but still getting involved in media and looking ahead. So, but as it relates back to 94 Til Infinity, I appreciate the plug, or the opportunity to plug that as well too. If you can, like, if you're listening to this and you're interested, check it out. It's on kind of everywhere, but the idea is basically to talk about soccer, but maybe not so much of like a news and analysis, although there is some news and some analysis, but it's not so much about what's happening on the pitch. So the first episode is titled How to Watch the World Cup in Qatar Without Completely Hating Yourself. And it actually was born out of a little bit of like a group chat, because I was like talking to a bunch of friends about what I want to do and like our plans for the upcoming year. And it was a World Cup year. And I was like, man, I might want to go to Qatar. Like that would be really fun to go to the World Cup. And I have never been to a World Cup other than the 94 World Cup, which was one of my earliest kind of like big impactful memories. Going to Stanford Stadium, and I saw Brazil play the US there. And I was like, wow, like this is it, know? But I think because of playing pro and all that, like I wasn't able to go to World Cups. I had some teammates that played in Brazil, which was amazing. But so I was kind of thinking about it, but then I was like, I don't know, like with all of the news that's come out around migrant labor and their like laws against queer people and all these different things, I was like, this is an issue. Like, I think I should really think about this. And it started kind of going from there, where I got into some like friendly debates with friends on group chats. And then I started to kind of elevate that conversation to a couple of creative partners that I work with. This guy, Michael Milberger, who brought me to MLS from like a digital media perspective, and was like the first person to believe in me and really gave me a platform to do the movement show. And it's just been like an awesome, he's like one of the most, talented, I don't know. I don't want to like go too far, but I feel like he's like way ahead of as far as like having vision of what soccer can be in this country.
Yeah.
And so I always like run any idea through him, and he's like, let's work on it together. And then we looped in another guy, Nick Fershaw, is like this incredible writer that has his own podcast called Paternal, which you guys would love, because it's all about like being a father and being a son, and like how like conceptions of modern manhood. So we all kind of started working together on that. And then it kind of, we were like, who should we speak with? And then this guy, Zito Madu, who's like this incredible writer, who recently moved to Brooklyn, I've been hanging out with, was like, yeah, I'll do an interview. And so we chatted, and that's kind of like the first episode. So I'm really kind of interested to see where it goes from here. Cause it's like, it's a fully independent podcast. Like, it's just literally like we're doing it on our like side hustle time. But there's like something really freeing about that, as far as not having to like, there's really no layers of like people other than our own as far as what we want to say, what we want to put in. Yeah. And I think that's like a really healthy way, or like a really cool way to kind of create something, and kind of see where it goes from there.
Yeah.
What's the derivation of the name? I was curious. Which is a very cool name, and I love your graphics. They're fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well
Well done.
Thank you. Yeah, no, the name is so 94 Til Infinity kind of came from this idea of saying like that 94 World Cup moment for me that I just mentioned as being like kind of the impetus of like, or like a turning point for me as far as like my love for the game. And I love the game already, but to see it at that level, like the World Cup level, and not just on the field, like I barely remember the actual match. Like I don't remember a whole lot from the match, but I do remember pretty much everything that happened outside the stadium, as far as that like canary yellow jersey from Brazil, and the like samba dancing, and the like pickup soccer outside, and the barbecue. Like you can I could just like take myself back to being really young and being there for that. And
like, you were 10, 11 years old, kind of 10, 11?
I was like, I was maybe a little older. I was like 12.
Okay.
And
impressionable years.
And 4 years later, I convinced my mom to let me go to Brazil by myself for like 4 weeks and train at a youth academy there. So I trained at this like Zico Futebol Academy in Rio, and I stayed with like a family friend who was one of my mom's a professor at Berkeley, but she had a Brazilian colleague that like had family there, and they're like, oh, you can stay with my cousin. And she was like 26 or 27 and had her own apartment. But like I got there and I thought she was going to kind of like look out for me, and she like dipped for like 4 days at a time. She was gone. And I was just sitting there like, all right. Now I got to figure out how to catch the bus to training, which was far away. There was a woman who came by and brought food, but it was like total fish out of water situation. And also even on the pitch, like fish out of water in the sense of like, I thought I was the man in my little like bubble in Berkeley, as far as being like, oh yeah, I'm scoring goals. I'm like one of the best guys in my school or in my neighborhood. And I got to Brazil and I was like, oh damn, I'm in trouble. And if I really want to like make a push towards, being a professional or college or whatever I had in my mind, I need to like really think bigger than just what I'm seeing right in front of my face. But yeah, that like 94 was that moment for me. And I think for a lot of people, as far as like what this sport could be in this country. And so that idea of like that being Til Infinity. And then it's kind of like also a subtle nod to the legendary Souls of Mischief crew from the Bay and their song 93 Til Infinity. So we just kind of like, updated a little bit and kind of took it from there.
Well, the episode's great. I loved it. I like sort of the political intersection that you guys cross into. It's a great listen and very topical.
Thank you.
Particularly what's going on in Russia, Ukraine. The 2018 World Cup was played there, and it's a good production. Obviously, your podcast is different than ours. We can put one out one a week, which is our goal, we
Yeah.
don't have quite, we don't have you're looking at our
It's
writing,
different levels of production.
our
yeah.
writing staff and our production staff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
But
I
that's
think
what I like about podcasts is like, there are so many different types, right? And
Yeah.
like, it's something that you don't need huge barriers to entry. And like, that was the part for me. It was like,
100%.
how do I tell these stories? Maybe without like hopping on a plane with like 2 camera operators and a sound guy and go out and do these kind of like docu stories that I've done in the past.
Yeah.
Whereas like all you got to do now is just like get someone on the line like this. You make
Yeah.
you have a nice conversation. Then we really decided to like try to do something a little bit different than you generally see in kind of the sports space, especially to like the artwork was done by this guy that I met actually here in Brooklyn, who's also from Berkeley. He went to
Let's
Berkeley
go.
High. His name's Rowan Spencer, and I met him at this place, Public Records. That's like a vegan restaurant, and there's like a sound room, like DJ situation in the back that he DJs at. And he was like, "Oh, I'm from the Bay. I love soccer." And he does a lot of design stuff. And I was like, "Oh, you got to help me with this thing."
Yeah.
And so that's
Perfect.
kind of just been like the spirit of the podcast. It's just like trying to like, get a bunch of people in and get involved and like make cool stuff and, talk about important, interesting topics.
Yeah. It's funny. Like, I feel like this was something I was going to bring up in the providing context, but I feel like so much of when I talk to you, it feels like we speak the same language in a way, because in making this podcast, I had a friend who actually ironically lives in Brooklyn who did all my design work. He did the logo, he created all the designs for the t-shirts. I had another friend make the music. And so it's about like pulling together these, creative people within your network to make something where for you, you get to control the entirety of how it looks, feels, sounds, and different from some of your podcast work in the past where you're doing it for MLS or for a company, And so I think that's really cool that you have the opportunity to do that. And then when you bring up the World Cup, I actually don't think I think about this enough, but I went to the World Cup in, was it
2010.
2010?
Yep.
Yeah, nice.
2010 in South Africa. And, that was a really, I think monumentous experience for me and my kind of outlook on soccer and its global influence. And similar to you, like I really don't remember the games. Like I went to the Slovenia USA game, or no, Algeria USA game where Landon Donovan scored the game-winning goal, and like beer showers, and like I don't really remember shit from the game, but I remember like hugging strangers in the stands and beer showers. We went to a North Korea Portugal game where Portugal won like 7-0. And I don't really remember the goals. I remember like looking around and seeing like the stadium filled with, I think after the fact, I found out like these were paid fans to pretend to be North Korean fans. And like in the North Korean media, they're saying that they beat Cristiano and Portugal. So like it's interesting how you talk about how that World Cup was such a big influence. And I think sometimes I forget that like I went to a World Cup, and much of what I took away from that is not what was on the field, but more the culture around that. So I think it's really cool that you're taking this project on. And like I said, we loved the first episode and excited for what's to come. I also want to talk about, because you mentioned you brought this up on your own. I was going to bring it up later, but you went down and trained in Brazil when you were 16, you said, and you talked about this mentality shift of, oh shit, like this is the level to be a pro. So at 16, you knew you wanted to be a pro. One of my questions was going to be, as a young kid running around the East Bay, you were born in Oakland, raised in Berkeley. I was raised in Oakland, born in Berkeley. But when you were running around East Bay as a kid, what were your aspirations? What did you want to be when you grow up? Was it that clear at a young age that you wanted to be a pro soccer player? Or just talk about young Calen in the East Bay. What was it like?
Yeah, I was funny. I went home recently and I was going through some old materials, and it was something I saw something that I had written in like maybe 5th or 6th grade or something that was like, when I grow up, I want to be a like, when you do those like school projects, and it was like, I either want to play in the World Cup the NBA or be like a movie producer or something like that. And I was like, oh, like, well, like the NBA part was ambitious, right? It's like that just wasn't gonna happen. But I remember like loving the NBA. I still like watching the NBA. The World Cup, like I didn't make a World Cup team or make the national team or anything like that. But I would say like, getting to MLS and having a successful career and getting to play with and against players that were, legendary players that have played in World Cups. And I think I got pretty close to that. And then like the movie producer side is maybe like TBD for right now.
Yeah.
I have been able to kind of like scratch that itch and get closer to, I wouldn't expect like sixth grade Calen to understand like how the internet and digital media was going to like change things, but like
things changed pretty quick.
Yeah, like I think like it's funny that kids sometimes know more than you think as far as like your intuitions or your dreams are following them. And like that was one thing that I think my mom was great for me, was like she always like made me feel like I could believe in that I could like do anything. And nobody in my family comes from a soccer or sports background, really. Like my mom will tell me though that like my athleticism comes from her side of the family. But
Same.
like my mom's a
Right.
professor at Berkeley. She teaches environmental science policy management. She's from Indianapolis originally. My dad is from Alice Springs, Australia. So I'm Aboriginal Australian. And they met in East Africa. So it's kind of like a really different kind of story. My mom was doing some like anthropological work and lived off and on in East Africa for like 20 years. My dad was doing some water engineering work, and I think he was working for the United Nations at a certain point. So they met there. And then I often joke that like, if you were to like have a kid from that situation, like where would you, if you were to just kind of like drop them on Earth somewhere, like spin the globe, like Berkeley would be a pretty good place
Perfect.
to like
I was
end
literally
up.
about to say, like, that
Yeah.
sounds like a kid from Berkeley's like parents and how they met.
Yeah.
Every kid from
So-
Berkeley has a professor for, a father or mother or both, right? Isn't it?
Exactly.
right?
Yeah. But the soccer part was always something that was more just like, I don't know. There was just something in me that was, and that just kind of like fell in love with the game. I just like took to it. I went to like a Mercy soccer camp in Berkeley at King Junior High. And I went 1 week, and then I was like, oh, I want to go back the next week. And I went back the next week, and I was like, I want to go again. And next thing I know, like it'd been like 9 weeks, the summer was over, and I was just like, that was it.
Yeah.
So I just kind of kept it running from there. And my mom was always like crazy supportive of everything that I needed to do. And like, including this trip, agreeing to let me go to Brazil by myself, which is kind of crazy at 16.
Yeah.
But I think like that was some of my like early memories of growing up in Berkeley. And, there was also like a big pickup soccer culture, and the infrastructure of youth soccer wasn't as good as it is now. So I was always switching teams and like driving all over the Bay Area, looking for the best pickup or the best like men's league I could hop in on, and like trying to find ways to continue to improve.
Yeah. No, I kind of feel like as you describe your childhood and experience growing up in the East Bay, I feel like seeing now what you've been doing post career, I feel like a lot of it makes sense. Like given like what you were exposed to and your interests, like it's cool to see how it kind of lined itself up. You mentioned obviously you went to Cal. We were looking at, we both did our research, but I was looking at your resume and your bio, and it's quite a bio, quite a list of accolades you have over your collegiate and professional career. I'll give you the love now. Three-time first team all Pac-12, or no, Pac-10, a little bit dated back then. No, just joking. All-American, drafted 10th overall, spent 8 seasons in MLS. So you were able to have this illustrious career. You accomplished, I'm assuming if you were to tell 10-year-old Calen that you got to do those things, well, I don't know if your ambition was the World Cup at that point, but still that's a pretty damn good career, I will say. When you look back and kind of reflect on it, you did a little bit earlier when you mentioned some of the legends that you've been able to play with and having this MLS career. How do you reflect looking back on your career? Does it meet the expectations that you had, maybe as a kid, or, just looking back, how do you reflect on your experience?
Yeah, I think I went further than I could have expected, or than I would have dreamed. I think it is easy, and I think part of being an athlete is like this kind of like, oh well, what if I would have made the World Cup, or like it would have been nice to get a call up with the national team, or like maybe I could have tried to get a call up with Australia because I got my citizenship there. So I like, we're all like sort of gonna carry that those thoughts
The what ifs
forever. Exactly. Yeah. What if I didn't tear my ACL in MLS Cup? Like, would we have won that game? Like, who knows, And but when I look back and I reflect on the whole story, and I've had a little more time to do that through some of these like awards, or even just kind of like with time and a little distance. So yeah, I'm incredibly proud, but I think also like sometimes the stories that we have for ourselves, or when we look at our Wikipedia pages or our accolades, like they seem very like clean and bright and shiny and just like how amazing it all was. And like there was also like obviously like some real struggles to get there. And like for me, I wasn't recruited to any college programs.
Really?
No, not at all. Like I got cut from like every state team possible. Wow. I never made a state team, and I was like, I'd like to say I didn't try out or I didn't try, but I was trying hard to like make those teams. And just faced with like bitter disappointment, but I didn't give up, and like I kept pushing to like this Brazil trip, or training with the SEALs, or playing with older people, or like putting myself in positions to challenge myself. And then I just started like showing up at people's doorsteps. Like I went up to UW on a family vacation and just like knocked on the coach's door and was like, hey, I'm a soccer player, I want to come here. And he was like, I was like, should I come to your camp? And he's like, don't come to my camp, but we'll come watch you, or I don't know. But then like every time Berkeley played them, like I think almost most games I scored against them. And so it was like, nice. I just like, and Berkeley gave me a chance. I came at a really good time when Kevin Grimes had just came to Berkeley, and it was like a fresh start. And I just showed up to his camp, and he had, he was like, had some recruits there, and I played well against the recruits. And so suddenly I kind of like became a recruit, but even still, like I didn't come in with any expectations or anything. And so just kind of built from there. But I owe a lot to Kevin Grimes and to Berkeley. He just finished, and now my old teammate Leonard Griffin is now taking over the head coaching job, which I'm really excited about.
I talked with Leonard the other day. He was at our training.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Great guy.
Awesome guy. Yeah, I was roommates with him in Chicago my first year with the Fire. So
nice.
Super happy.
Our Max's sister Madison used to work with Max Griffin at Adidas.
Oh, nice. Yeah, Max is the man. Yeah.
Hey, so, well, Calen, for all the research we did on you in preparation for this, one thing that did not come out in any of the research was what you just mentioned, kind of pretty casually, but I think is a really big part of your story, which is no one recruited you. No one was interested. I mean, your soccer resume is really impressive, but it does not square with what you just said, which is no one was particularly interested in me in terms of having me play on their college team. And that's quite an interesting part of your history, and maybe an important teaching moment maybe for those who listen to our podcasts. And it's one of
it's a common theme.
It is a common. Something exactly what I was going to say.
I'm glad you brought it up. Well, I'm more glad you brought it up, Calen, because like my dad said, I did not know that either. If you look at your accolades, you assume that you were a stud since you were a kid. I mean, I'm sure you were still a stud, but to hear that you went unrecruited, and also the fact that you mentioned that, you had a lot of struggles throughout your career. You mentioned you tore your ACL in a cup final. Like, so much of being a pro is an iceberg, and nobody sees the sacrifices. Nobody sees the struggles that you go through. And so, I'm really glad that you brought that up. And I think you brought up an interesting dynamic of the what ifs, because I'm similar in that, I was 20. I didn't sign my first contract until I was 23. So in a sense, the fact that I'm still playing in my 6th year, like, I'm like, I'm not supposed to be here in the first place. This is a blessing, and I'm just playing professionally. That's a dream accomplished. I should be super proud of that. And then part of me is like, I have friends playing in MLS. Like, what if I went and played academy since I was 13? How would my development would have been different instead of staying and playing for Bay Oaks till I was 17? What if, would I be playing in MLS? I don't know. But then there's the other part of me that's like, be grateful for being at where I am today, and, being on this journey where I was 22, calling a family friend, like saying, I might be quitting soccer. How am I going to like live with myself, because I dedicated my whole life to it. So I think you bring up a lot of really important points in your story, because, like we said, when people see you receiving these awards and honors, they think that it was all great. But, I know you, and I know probably the amount of work that you put in to get to this point is huge. And so, I credit you for being honest and, saying you went through some shit to get to where you are.
You must have had a lot of confidence in your ability to kind of know I'm good enough to play college soccer. Did you know that? I mean, because no one was knocking on your door, that could shake your confidence, right? Because you undoubtedly hear about other folks getting offers from this college or that college, getting recruited, and the letters or the phone calls aren't coming. I guess that was before texts and emails and Instagram.
No, I think like I did believe in myself that if I could get an opportunity, that I could do something with it. And so I was really just kind of like, just really trying to get my foot in the door, more than anything. I would say, like, I would love to say that all those coaches were wrong. I think some of them were, but I think also the hard part for a young player to think about is like, I actually think that I really needed, when I look back at my game, like, I think there were things that I really was missing or that I needed to improve on. And I think some of them were like just sort of oversights that were kind of befitting the time, as far as like, I grew late. So I was like very small. I didn't get my speed really until college. And then I just remember like having to beat a guy, and then like he'd be back and I'd have to beat him again. And then I'd be like, damn, all right. And then suddenly I was like, oh, I can just beat him once. And then I was like, I don't even really need to do a move. I can just kind of like push and go. And I was like, whoa, this is nice. But so I think some of it was that. And I think a lack of like, just kind of the way we identified players. And I'd love to say that that's fully changed, but I still think there's a ton of kids out there that are like not getting that opportunity or that chance. 100%. And like, I also felt that once I got to the professional level, the fact that I had been through some adversity and heard some no's and heard plenty of them, like when I found out that like I wasn't starting opening day when I'd won, like I'd scored the most goals through our like preseason camp, I was like, all right, like I've been here before, like I know what that is. Whereas like sometimes guys who I thought maybe had an easier path that didn't ever hear no until they got to the pros. And then they were like, oh, damn, that guy's like Costa Rican international. That guy's like, from Colombia and is like playing a number 10 role over me, and like couldn't really adapt or like adjust to the idea that they weren't the best. Where I was like, oh, I know exactly what that is. And like, I know when a coach's feedback is like probably BS and that I should just like keep doing my thing, and when I should maybe listen. And like and then like later in my career I learned when to kind of like push back and fight for myself. That I wish I would have known that or done that more earlier, but I think if you don't advocate for yourself, like even in a coach's office, that's important. Those are things that you can like, now I take it into maybe Zoom rooms or anything somewhere else, which is kind of funny to think about. But those are some things that like I think I still feel the same way as you though, Max. Like I went on trial at Arsenal when I was 21 too, and
I saw that in my research.
Wow. And I think about like how much I just like training there for a bit, seeing like how fast I felt like I was growing. And that's where I'm like, okay, the infrastructure and the way things are changing now and the success we're seeing for US and like Canadian players, especially, it's like, okay, I can see how having access to that type of thing, like what that can do for a player. So I still have those thoughts of like, man, what if I had like wasn't out just like hustling around the Bay Area trying to find it, and like there was some strength that came with it, but also it's good to like have these more like professional environments. I think my only question is like, as we grow, how do we hold on to players that like, how do we create players that still have some of that spirit, or like don't have it all the way easy, and like still kind of build that within this like more professional framework that gives kids like better resources and more exposure to like top players and coaches and all that.
You know, when you mention going through some adversity in your career and that actually being a good thing, because if there's anything that I noticed once I got to the professional level, it's that it's a business. You find that out very quickly. And, you know, you could be playing great, but that doesn't mean you're going to be playing in the 11 or in the 18. And there's very few players who go through a professional career and don't face any form of adversity, being left out the 18, going through injuries, all that. And so I think, you know, you talked about it being a good thing that you went through adversity. I think the same thing. When I was going undrafted, you know, my first year I was celebrating making the 18. And then I was like, okay, like I want to make the 11. And it's like, now it's like, well, I want to impact the game. So I think there's a lot of players who I played with at a younger age or in my early years professionally who were, you know, first round MLS draft picks or, you know, played for youth national teams. But the second they faced a little bit of adversity, they're like, holy shit, what is this? And mentally, they're not able to respond. They might be great players, but like, you know, can you talk a little bit about just the mental side of being a pro or just being a footballer in general? Because I think, you know, like I mentioned earlier, the iceberg thing, it's so much of thriving and excelling, especially at the pro level, is mentally. So could you just talk a little bit about kind of the mental aspect of that?
Yeah, I think like that's one of the biggest shifts, because even if you're playing college, or I was playing on a like academy and PDL teams that were like very good teams, like very good players. But like when you go to the professional level, that seems to be I think the biggest gap as far as just understanding the level of like competition, the responsibility that you carry. And like, if you don't track a runner in a 7-on-7 drill, where in college or you're in a PDL team or something, you might be okay. Suddenly you've got to answer not so much to the coach, but to your own teammates. And some of that pressure, I think, was like, that was like, all I remember coming in and feeling like all I wanted was to like earn the respect of the guys on the team. And it was a little bit different environment now. I think it's a little more friendly to young players now, mainly because young players are like actually playing more, where that was not necessarily the expectation. And just the whole business model has shifted as far as like selling players and getting them playing young with the first team. But yeah, that mental gap is huge. But luckily I played with a really good team. My early Chicago teams had like, all of them are top managers now, like Jim Curtin and Philly, Chris Armas is at Man United. We've got John Thornton's now like the, president at LAFC. Logan Paz has been a coach. Gonzalez Cigares, Costa Rican international. He's now, I think, the U18 U.S. men's national team coach. Like there's just Zach Thornton's a coach. CJ Brown's a Chicago Fire assistant. Like pretty much our whole roster has gone on to be a head coach or assistant coach or technical director. So I was just around a bunch of like really good natural leaders that I think helped me to like improve my game. But I think just like more than anything, the mental side of just being prepared to try to like win the respect of your teammates was like kind of the way I tried to approach it.
Yeah, no, I think that's very similar to my experience. Like when I spent time just as a practice player before I was given an opportunity in a preseason, and like I just didn't want to get yelled at and small sided. That was like biggest goal is like, do not be the guy to fuck things up and small sided, because if you do, like, you will not hear the end of it. Like, or like people, I mean, they could, like, it's a ruthless business. Like you don't want to be that dude. So I feel you on that. You know, we've talked a bit about your soccer career, and, you know, we could talk all day about that, but one of the reasons why I love talking to you, and I think we kind of speak the same language as what you've been able to accomplish off of the field. Can you just talk a little bit about post-career, or post-soccer career, what were you thinking of as your pivot, as you moved into media? And then I want to talk a little bit about the movement with MLS and kind of that experience.
Well, that's the part, it goes back to what we were talking about before, as far as like how it looks kind of like on paper versus like reality.
Yeah.
Because on paper it all seems very simple, where it's like, okay, yeah, you majored in media studies at Berkeley, you played in MLS, then you worked for the league doing, media, as like a producer and correspondent. And yeah, now I'm doing more of that as well. But I would say like the journey to get there was not quite so simple. I knew I always loved media. I always loved writing. I wrote for like our student paper in high school. I knew right away coming into Berkeley that I wanted to do media studies. So I started kind of on that track. And I was always interested when I was playing in doing media as well too. So like when oftentimes like the communications director would come over to the guys and be like, hey, we got to do an interview. Can you do this? And I was like, yeah. And so a lot of guys were like, no, I'm definitely not feeling that, which I respect. But, even to the point where like we'd play like CONCACAF Champions League. I remember we played a game in Panama against, I think it was Arabe Unido. And a lot of the Latin guys on our team didn't want to do media, especially. And so they were like kind of desperately searching for someone to be like, hey, can you do this? And I was like, I don't know anybody in Panama. Like, this is local TV. Okay.
Yeah.
So I tried to do some Spanish, and like, I was just always saying yes. And I started actually after tearing my ACL in 2012 in the final, which was this whole crazy story with like, scoring a goal in the first half and then tearing my ACL in the second. And then we were winning 1-0 when I tore my ACL. And then all of a sudden I scored 2 goals, and like, it just shifted really quickly. And I think that was the first time where I started thinking like, okay, what else what's my next step? Because I'm going to fight like hell to get back from this thing. It was the second ACL on the same knee, and it was in the final. It was like this whole thing. But that next year I started doing like sideline hits with Comcast Sportsnet, where I started kind of like shadowing Sebastian Salazar, who's now at ESPN. Started shadowing him at Comcast Sportsnet in Houston and being in the studio and like helping him do like little things around the studio, or he's doing some writing. And so that was the first time where I was kind of like, oh, I want to do this.
Real quickly, was that like, were you seeking that out, or was that, you mentioned how like they'd be asking for media and you'd be like, oh, I'll do it. At this point, had you kind of been like, okay, I want to move into this next phase, like, let me seek out opportunities? Or were those still opportunities that were just kind of like you stumbled into them? You were injured, like, hey, you want to do this, you got some time, and you just did it? Or were you like, let me start preparing and let me seek out these opportunities?
I think it's a little of both. Like, I was always, whenever I got invited on those shows, like, before I was injured, I was always making sure to like say, hey, I'm available, like I'm around, I like doing this. And like, I see you doing the same thing with the Roots. And like, before you DM'd me, I'd seen all your stuff where you're like hosting the shows, or like, doing little stand-ups and things like that, which are, I think, in leading up to this podcast, I would say there were times where I felt a little bit weird, because I think sometimes the front office or the manager, they were actually really supportive, but I felt this feeling of like, is it okay for me to be doing this as well? And I think it's just something that guys can be fearful of. I am happy to see that there is more of like a cultural shift happening, where I see a bunch of like players that are currently players like yourself, and guys across MLS that are doing more media stuff, or like owning their own podcasts, or doing their own like side projects, or whether it's fashion or clothes or anything like that. So I think that's really cool to see. But
You've talked about this in the past, Max, because there was a concern that if a current player has too many outside interests or ventures, there's a potential for a perception by the team that Calen, Max, they're into other stuff. They're not single-minded.
Soccer is not your main
Right.
priority.
And it's a little bit of a risk in kind of venturing too far off the pitch in your other ventures, that you might be perceived as he's not totally committed to the team. And it sounds like things that ran through your mind, or that culture existed, but probably you're right, it has changed over the last 10, 15 years.
Yeah, I look across sports, like what LeBron's doing with his media platform. Like you look, I think, especially at the women's game with like in women's soccer with Rapinoe, and like even like Alex Morgan, and you just look across the like the WNBA, like there's just so many men and women that are like really contributing to media, and this idea of like, you coined it as like more than an athlete. And I think for some people, maybe just like watching soccer all day and focused on that, and just like training and being disciplined and all that is like, I mean, those are all things I was, but I also like to, it really was like, I tried to not live with guys on my team. I wanted to like meet other people around Chicago, around Houston, the cities I was in. Like I tried to engage in topics that were, that were like, that mattered to me. But I would say I still probably put a lot of those things to the side for the sport. And so I guess now I feel in a better place where I'm kind of like more closely aligned to like bringing these two different sides of myself into like one thing that feels more like, I don't know, just more natural to me than having to be like, oh, it's just soccer, or it's just this like social, cultural, like political side or interests. And like, those things really fit together, and kind of always did, but I didn't always feel maybe I could access them both at the same time, at least in my playing career.
Yeah, no, I feel it's like, honestly, it's a little weird, some of the parallels with what you say and kind of my experience, because, my first couple of years playing professionally, I had that perception that in order to be a pro, you had to be 24/7, like soccer, soccer, soccer. So I'd just come home from training, be tired physically, but mentally, I would just be bored as hell for the rest of the day. And it wasn't until the last few years that I've realized that at the end of the day, if you're able to go into the office and do your job and perform, that's all that matters. And so for some pros, sitting at home and watching soccer all day, playing video games, that's your form of preparing yourself for the next day's training or the game or whatever. For someone like yourself, or someone like myself, being able to express yourself creatively through different outlets and doing other things, connecting with different people, you said, meeting other people outside of this game, maybe that's the fulfillment, the fuel that you need to then show up to the training ground refreshed and not feel like I'm just being drained because I'm consuming soccer, 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 that when it's time to perform, I'm like, I'm all burnt out from soccer. It's like sometimes, everyone operates on a different kind of routine or wavelength, whatever they need to perform. So, it took me a few years, and I'm sure, it took you a little bit of time as well, but I think, and the fact that you mentioned, like, now you've been able to kind of blend those two things, I think that's kind of like the ultimate goal. A career is being able to not just do something for money, but be able to combine multiple things that you're passionate about. And at the end of the day, if you're able to make a living off of it, like, that's great. But from a happiness fulfillment standpoint, like, if you are able to combine these passions of yours and not feel like you have to shut stuff off, then I feel like that's an ultimate goal. I feel like,
Yeah, no, I think it's real. And like, just like anything, as far as like training or figuring out what your strengths are on the pitch, like it takes some time to kind of figure that out off it as well. And like, one thing I really like about this podcast is like, when I've heard the episodes with like Rodney Wallace or Warren Creval, like they talked about those journeys of how you kind of like find those other things that were kind of speak to you in a deeper way. And like, I remember Warren was a rookie in Houston when I was like a vet there. And like this dude, after training, I'd be like, what are you up to, man? First of all, he like didn't talk to me for months because he was just like this quietest guy, very low key. He had a flat top at the time. And I was like, who is this guy? And he was like people started calling him the octopus because his legs he would just like wrap his legs around somebody and like win the ball back.
Yeah.
And we were like, oh damn, this guy's really good. But like I started talking to him just a little bit, and he'd be like, oh yeah, I'm going to look at like this fabric stores, or like look at different like textiles and things. And I was like, huh, okay, that's interesting. Like but he was like already kind of keeping an eye on this idea of like what Craval is, his fashion line is now. But I think like he probably also felt, I don't want to speak for him, but probably like he was keeping that a little bit on the low.
Yeah.
And then like, I think Rodney as well, like guys that have these other interests, but are now getting a chance to kind of like really blossom. And like, I'd like to see that happen more. And I'm happy to see that happening more through like this kind of like next generation of people that are doing it on both sides.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about the movement. Was that, when that ended, was that something that it kind of had just come to a point where you've done enough episodes, where you've explored enough topics? Were you kind of like, I'm ready to move on to something else? Did they want to cut it? Because just watching some of the episodes and just looking at it from a bird's eye, a show where you get to travel around the world talking about the impact of soccer on culture and the convergence of those topics. You get to interview some of the biggest stars in world football. You just get to share these amazing stories. Like, that sounds like a dream gig. Like, if I'm being honest, like it's pretty much like the Anthony Bourdain of soccer and culture.
Yeah.
In a way.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not comparing it exactly the same, but like, it's a really cool experience. So what was that experience like, hosting that show, producing it, being involved with it? And, why did that ultimately stop? Just could you talk a little bit about that experience?
I like this. This is like, we're now getting to the part where it's like, let's get spicy here. No,
Oh, yeah.
that was not the intention. I was just like, it seems like so cool, like such a cool gig. Like, why stop after a couple of
well, first of all, like the show, we didn't keep it just in like markets. So it wasn't just like, at a certain point we moved it from just being like, hey, we're going to go to this team and then like do a story MLS there. And then we're going to like, I would say we were worried about running out of teams, but then like there's a brand new MLS team every like 20 minutes. So, there was plenty of opportunity to continue to do more, but we also wanted to take it much broader than that. And like, we did everything from going to Hawaii with Brian Ching. I went to Costa Rica, where Rodney Wallace's family is from, to the little town in Limon on the coast, where it's more the Afro-Caribbean side of Costa Rica. And all these players like him and Kendall Waston and all these guys had come from this like Caribbean small little port town that had been a really kind of rough area. And were like way over indexed as far as their like impact on the pitch and representation at the World Cup, but also dealing with some kind of like racial like racism towards the Black players and Costa Ricans, and whether people from Limon were really Costa Ricans or not. And so, we kind of went way further than just the stories that were just on the pitch. One of my favorites was actually the last one we did, which was in El Paso, where we went after the Walmart shooting and looked at kind of how soccer was in some ways like a little bit of a healing force around the community to come together. And the community, I mean, like between El Paso and Juarez, which is like the sister city across the border. So like there was plenty more. I think there was plenty more to do. And I think that like that type of storytelling is something that I think is going to continue to grow, whether that's at MLS or elsewhere. And I've been trying to kind of like endeavor to do some of that still on my own. But, part of it was just like COVID happened. And like, suddenly I was like, oh, damn, like, it's not so easy to like hop on a plane I don't know when we're going to be able to get a couple guys on a plane and go to like Costa Rica or all these places I'm talking about, which is when I actually got more interested in doing this podcast version of it. And so that was also around the time that Black Players for Change was forming. So I started interviewing guys where I was like, damn, like Ray Gaddis hit me up and was like, hey, can you come to Indianapolis? I'm going to protests. Like, I want to document this. And I was like, I looked up, like, I was like Google Maps and trying to find videographers and stuff, but it was just a really kind of scary time. And so I was like, let's just record audio interviews. and it started just building from that and talking to guys in the bubble. So like I would say like, and then honestly, like MLS let go of like 20% of the company and got rid of a bunch of, especially on the media side, was really impacted. So that really changed the kind of like scope of the work that they're doing. I do think I'm hopeful that MLS gets back to kind of telling some of those more impactful and meaningful stories.
Yeah.
One, because I think they're like ways to bring people in to the league and to draw people in that maybe aren't just only focused on what's happening on the pitch. And I think they will. I'm hopeful that maybe this new media deal will open some of that up, whether they do it or somebody else does it. But yeah, I think that type of show I would expect to see, maybe not exactly like with me hosting it or like talking about exactly the same topics, but I would expect to see stuff like that happening more and more. And other places have done it. I know like Aaron West has done a great job of doing some really great storytelling, still doing it with CBS. And I've seen like, some guys like this guy, Ellie Mangum, who's over in Copa 90 abroad. And there's just a lot of creators that are now doing it, like, even not on big networks or, digital platforms and stuff. So, but yeah, that's kind of like the lowdown of like how that all went. And then, yeah, I think, like I said, I'm still doing a bunch of like work that I really enjoy with MLS, but also like really hoping to kind of like either through 94 Til Infinity, scratch some of those stories that I want to tell. And then also like find new places to do it as well.
Well, for the decision makers in the soccer world who listen to our podcast, we miss it, right?
Yeah.
That was good stuff. That was good content.
Yeah.
And I think there's the stuff that happens off the pitch is really, interesting, and it makes what happens on the pitch even more interesting. It puts stuff into context. It's really good stuff. The human side of being a professional athlete, or the journeys these guys take. So we miss it.
Yeah. Thank you. Let's go.
On a personal note relating to that series, I know that you want to get back to, I mean, you're telling those stories with the podcast, but throughout that experience, you got to interview the likes of Zlatan, like Magic Johnson, Will Ferrell. Like, these aren't just some of like the biggest names in like US football or global football. These are just like some of the biggest names in general. So like from a personal standpoint, like, did you ever kind of pinch yourself in that experience of like, you had this great career and now here you are on the other side doing media, and like you're getting to interview some of the biggest names in the world and travel around the globe doing it. Now kind of reflecting on that, I mean, that's pretty incredible, after such a successful career. So like, how do you reflect kind of, I want to give you your flowers, because that's like, it's really, really dope. Like, looking back, what was that experience like on a personal note, like getting to host that?
Yeah, it was amazing. And that's why I like was trying to shout out Michael Milberger, who like brought me to MLS. And like literally like the way that happened was I was doing like a creative side project after I finished my career. I moved back to Berkeley. I was trying to figure out what I was going to do next. I was like searching, let's say. I was trying to figure it out, and I was like kind of rehabbing, and I had never really announced my retirement, and my agent was hitting me up to be like, "Are you retired?" And I was like, I don't know.
I'll let you know.
Yeah. But I was like, I found myself like, I started writing. I started this like project called 50 to 14. And it was like counting down 50 days to the 2014 World Cup, with like every day telling stories on Instagram. So I had like friends that were like, Jeff Cameron was playing in the World Cup and for the US team. So he like sent me some photos from there, and I interviewed him from his hotel in Brazil. I was talking to other players I went to Hawaii just for a friend's wedding, which was amazing. But I hung out with Brian Ching's mom, and she showed me all these told me these incredible stories of how she would send him like stuffed animal turtles every time he scored a goal from Hawaii, but he scored so many goals that she couldn't find enough turtles to send him. And he was the first Hawaiian to like play in the World Cup. And so I was telling all these stories. I did some writing for like opening ceremony during that time. And this guy, Michael Milberger, saw me posting about this and just like DM'd me on Twitter, or like messaged me on Twitter, and was like, "Hey, would you want to do some on camera work?" And the funny part was I was like, desperate to find on camera work and facing a lot of the same problems that I had, like literally like Pac-12 network wouldn't give me like a game, or it was like hard to get my foot in the door anywhere. And I was like, damn, like I was like Pac-10 all century team and all this stuff, like and I was just finding that same kind of like I felt like I was like trying to get to college D1 again. And so when he asked me if I wanted to do on camera work, I like tried to play it cool, where I was like, oh yeah, you know, I'd be interested to that.
Might be able to fit that in somewhere in my schedule. Let me take a look.
Meanwhile, I was like desperate. But the coolest part was like, he really gave me some structure, similar to like the way, you know, a coach would, to really, you know, he came from an NBC background and executive produced the movement all the way through, but also really let me kind of like drive it like narratively and like what spoke to me. So ironically, I went to Hawaii with Brian Ching. We interviewed his mom with a camera crew, like the turtle story, literally a sea turtle pulled up on the beach next to us as I was interviewing him. And I was like, whoa, this is like,
meant to be.
You know,
could not have scripted that, right?
Yeah. And so I think like the show itself, like, was cool because they let me really bring my full like self to the show and in picking the stories. And that took us to some interesting places that were like, yeah, involved like some of the biggest names, like interviewing Zlatan in Manchester, with like literally there was like a lion that was hired beforehand as well too. So like the first half of the day I was like watching this lion shoot, kind of terrified. And then the second half I was like interviewing Zlatan the lion and like also kind of terrified because dude's energy was like just like he might snap. He was nice, but he was like, it was intense. And so like from the big stuff to like, honestly, the stuff that I think called to me a little bit more was like, you know, people who had really interesting stories that maybe weren't the biggest names. Like, I spent a lot of time with Mohammed El Munir in LA, the LAFC defender, and like went into a mosque with him and spent time with people during Ramadan. And like, we played with guys, I'm sure you played with guys that fast during Ramadan. And I was always, you know, really interested, but I didn't quite maybe understand what that was. And so I think it gave me like a really cool platform to travel, to push myself, to meet new people and like learn a lot about like the world through soccer and in ways that like, yeah, maybe I did when I was young and like maybe did casually in a locker room, but never really kind of with the like platform or the depth to really kind of dive deep into a lot of stories like that.
It is the feeling of interviewing, you know, someone maybe, you know, a very high profile, you're probably a little nervous, right? Is it the same feeling as right before a big game, you know, before you know, step onto the pitch and get that first touch? Is there crossovers there in terms of just being a little bit on edge, a little good nervous, right? There's a good nervous, right?
Totally. I think that's right on. Like,
that's one thing that was right on that I just said.
Honestly, right like the fact that you mentioned like being nervous and getting your first touch in a game is weird because he's never played a soccer game. Like, so like the fact that you actually have that, like, because it's a thing, you know, you want to get a feel for the ball, you want to get your touches, and that'll kind of calm your nerves. So it's weird that you have that perspective.
Well, when I was coaching you under 6 soccer, I had that feeling right before kickoff of, you know, that first, you know, how's it? No, but go ahead, Calen.
No, I think that's just like a good way of just kind of like being a little bit uncomfortable. Or I remember even those early days when I was doing those Comcast hits in Houston, like being nervous and you see the red light come on and you're like, I can't fuck this up. And you're like, which is like a feeling that's familiar, you know? And if it goes well, you feel great. And if it goes poorly, you're kind of devastated, but you still come back. And I think that's like the exciting part post-playing career was like being brand new at something and feeling like you can really continue to grow and learn. And I think I really have. I still have a lot of ways to go. And like, even when I watch my early stuff, like the spirit of it all was right there. And I think the storytelling part has always been pretty strong, but even from like the production, understanding like production, I've now produced a bunch of different things like behind camera with that I'm not even featured in. And like I've just learned a lot that I think has been really cool. And like I'm still trying to learn. I'm trying to bring that to like everything I'm doing.
Yeah.
Hey, I'll be honest. Before this interview, I was a little nervous. We're
Nice.
interviewing the great Calen Carr.
Oh, no way.
Legend
Stop.
at Berkeley, Cal, MLS, a fellow podcaster.
I was nervous for this too.
That's why you're sharp. I think that's why it's been such a
Yeah.
sharp interview, because we've all been, this was a big one to get up for.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so far so good. But
No, I would say you guys do a great job of like, in all the interviews I've heard you guys do, it's just like, and it was joking before. I was like, oh, are we rolling right now?
Yeah.
Are we on? And I think that's like a really important thing and it's something you can like learn. I really try to make the people, I know what it feels like to be on camera. So even if I'm not on camera, I try to help people to feel comfortable, and doing it in the course of an interview is like a whole other skill. But I think, yeah, Max, I think you have like a natural ability to do that. And like, even from the stories that I've heard just through your, through Marathon Minute, like that's one of the things I think being a player really helps, because guys understand that like you're doing this right now, and like you understand what that's like. And you're not out like, trying to like get a sound clip or trying to do somebody dirty or anything like that. So there's just going to be some trust there. It's important.
Well, I appreciate that coming from you. That means a lot. But I think what you kind of mentioned about post-career wanting to continue to learn and continue to be uncomfortable, that's something that I think a lot of times people can find their career path post-college or whatever, post-soccer career, and get very complacent and kind of just think like, oh, my career's done, like time to do this for the next 50 years, where it's like, if you're continuing to challenge yourself and be uncomfortable, like I feel like that's how you're going to get the most out of your career, whether that's football or outside of football. So that's kind of what I'm trying to do here, is like do new things and be uncomfortable and learn, because I found that when I'm stagnant, that's like the worst thing for me mentally, because I don't know, it's not great for me. So I'm continually trying to do things that I don't necessarily know or do well. Like you mentioned, you look back at some of your old stuff. I recently listened to like our first podcast with the Moby, and like there's parts of it where I'm like cringing. I'm just like, oh my God, like the way I phrase certain questions, or just even just like the editing of it, like it was just like so choppy. And I'm just like, oh my God, we've come such a long way in a year. It's really cool to see. And it's makes me very optimistic to see, like, one of the things that I preach about in the show is like, if you want to do something, the best thing to do is to just do it, like to start, and not to like think about, oh, getting all these things perfect. Because if one of the things that I was hesitant about with the podcast, like, oh, I need the audio quality to be on point. I need everything to be, I'm a perfectionist. So I was like, I need the graphics to be on point. I need the transition, all this, we need a sponsor. And it's like, looking back, that first season, by the end, it got pretty good. But those first like 4 or 5 episodes, like they're not perfect by any means. But like, I can now sit in this chair and look at this interview that we're doing now, and it's 10 times better than it was a year ago. And so that's kind of a rant that I just went on, but like, I think, you make a lot of good points about your post career, how you've been able to thrive because you are putting yourself in uncomfortable situations and continually wanting to do new things. Like you talk about being behind the camera, in front of the camera, where I'm sure someone could have been complacent and just been like, yeah, I'll do some sideline reporting, I'll work for the MLS, and that'll be that. Whereas you're like, no, I'm going to do independent projects on the side. I'm going to continue to network with these different people and do new things. Okay, we've had you for a long time, and I appreciate all of this, because this is like, honestly, this is awesome, like getting to talk about all this stuff with you. But we've kind of gone full circle, and one of the things I brought up in the beginning was wanting to talk about what you're doing now, but we didn't talk about your new role with For Soccer Ventures. And you're now the head of brand, right? Head of brand,
Mhm, yeah.
which is a very, very cool title. I feel like very fitting as well for all that you're doing. Could you talk a little bit about how you came into this role? What motivated you to, I mean, I don't know how you're able to juggle all these things also at the same time. Like, does this mean you're doing like less stuff, or just could you talk a little bit about the role and how you came into it?
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
that would be the best way to put
You're like,
it.
you're like, what are you doing? How many things are you up to?
It's incredible, honestly.
No, it's well, so for Soccer Ventures, I'd been hearing like when they founded in like very early conversations in like 2019, 2020, and Richie Graham, who's a minority investor, owner, operator of the Philadelphia Union team, and started the like YSC Academy there in Philly. That's like, built out like Brendan Aronson and Mark McKenzie and a lot of like top players now. He started this group, and like this group is really, it's a really cool collective of basically people that mostly really come from soccer. So it's like Heath Pierce is the president, and I've played against Heath and known him for a long time. And he was like such a big advocate for me when I first moved to New York, and similarly like hit him up to be like, hey man, I know you're at Copa. I'm working now at MLS. Like, what's this like? How do I do this? Like, give me some tips. And we got to work together quite a bit. And like, he's just like a really talented guy that's like moved from on camera stuff and still doing a ton of that with like CBS. But also is like really understands the business side. And I know, Max, that's something you and I have talked quite a bit about as far as some of your ambitions around that. So you should definitely link up with Heath. I'll make that connect at some point. But yeah, like the amount of things that they work on is really interesting. So there's like Alianza de Football, which is like this amazing,
I remember that.
yeah, it's like camps and tournaments like all up and down, well, really all over the country now. They've got a Black Star initiative that I heard Warren talking about on this podcast, that he was a big part of, kind of like those early foundational elements of that program. And I know he's still involved. And then from like media, they do a bunch of their own media stuff. We've got this like really cool concept called FootyCon that we're developing, that they did a digital version of. That's like,
I remember that.
Yeah, kind of like this idea of like soccer culture coming together, similar to the way you would see like a Complex Con or things like that in the past. So there's just like a ton of exciting things coming on. And I'm like, it's funny because you asked me like, when do you find time to do all these things? And it's like, I really love the idea of being able to work across like so many different things, and it's like even within a single day, as opposed to like having the just this and only this. And so that's actually been one of the parts that I've really enjoyed so far. And I'm still learning a lot because I'm just kind of hopping on with these guys, but they've got a really good team.
Yeah, I had a couple of Adidas guys on that. I saw the on that team. Looked like it was a formidable team. And adding you, oh my goodness.
Yeah, no, it's growing fast. And so I think there was also just a time with COVID where a lot of places are really kind of taking like steps backwards, and like for the game to grow really towards 2026 the way we want it to, like we need to grow now, right? And fast. There's not a lot of time in this World Cup and the Women's World Cup next year, and like the Olympics and all that. So I just think we're in a really cool moment right now, and in like the growth of the sport. And like I would include that from the top levels down through the to the grassroots as well, and everything in between. Oakland Roots is like, to me, we didn't get a chance to talk a ton about it, but I feel like we have in the past. And it's like, for me, it's one of the more interesting, not just soccer projects, but like sports projects, as far as like the hope to like a team that's like designed for the community. And like a lot of the stories I've gone out and told are not, that connection piece is sometimes missing. So like, or secondary at least. And so I think making that like a fundamental part of your program is like really interesting. And I don't know, just being from the Bay too, it fits. When I go around Berkeley and I come home and I see like kids rocking Oakland Roots jerseys, and like, I'm sure the way, like, there's so many kids that are watching what you're doing right now and like wanting to be like, that's like the biggest team, like that's and with all the teams that have left Oakland too, it's just like a really interesting time in Oakland overall.
Yeah. No, I think you're exactly right. I think the ambitions of the club are so much more than being just a successful USL team. Like, it is very wide reaching. It's not just sports, it's the city, the community at large. I really do feel like we are at the ground level of like what is possible for that club.
Had to be a thrill though last night. Thrill for me,
Oh
maybe a
yeah,
thrill for
when
Max.
you did say that, I did see this guy. He has like a smirk, like when he's like, it's like a half smile. But you were very much smirking when you mentioned kind of seeing kids from Oakland and seeing me, because like we had a game last night. We picked up our first win of the season. Big for the Roots. But like post game, one of the coolest things for me is to like connect with young fans in the crowd, because like there was these kids that as we were warming up were just like nonstop, like, where'd you get your cleats, like, can I have your jersey after the game, like, let me get your socks, like all this. And like I like looked over to them and I was like, you guys want to know something cool? Like I grew up in Oakland too. And they're like, what? Like, and that, like, to me, that's like a really cool thing for me to do. And I want to be able to like let them know, like, hey, I was once you know.
Right,
And
right.
when we were younger, I was at a Cal game instead. I was looking at you play for Cal instead of kids watching Roots players. And there was this kid who went to my middle school who I like looked up. It was a kid I didn't recognize wearing my jersey with my name. And I'm like, where did you get that jersey? Because like I didn't give it to you, and like you can't go to the store and buy one. So like, how did you get that? And they're like, I customized it and ordered it online. Like I went to St. Paul's, and like,
Oh, no way.
that's just like crazy, you know. It's like to be able to.
I almost went to St. Paul. I
took your
almost went
word.
to St. Paul's too.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, that's funny.
That would have been just like another weird
Yeah.
parallel.
Yeah.
But
No, that must have been a thrill. It was a thrill for me to see a little kid with your number and name on the back of their jersey. It's got to be. Have you experienced that, Calen?
Yeah, actually, randomly, I had a really funny interaction. Somebody sent me an email, like, I want to say a couple weeks ago, and it was the fan that was in DC. So he wasn't even a Chicago Fire fan, but every time I came and played DC United, he was out there with like a sign for me. And it was he sent me a photo of like a jersey I'd given him, and I think a headband, because I was like rocking a headband at the time. So it was like an
we didn't
autographed
get to get
Nike
into the
headband.
headband, but it's
Yeah,
legendary.
yeah. There was some headgear, the helmet, the headband, all that.
Yeah.
But he sent me an email recently to say like, hey, I saw, I don't know, like it was basically just like checking in and saying, hey, you were like somebody I really admired. And I sent him a note, and like he's now works, I think, for a congressperson in DC. And he's like, I'll show you around next time you come to town. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. So yeah, like you never know, like those kids are going to grow up and maybe one day be Oakland Roots supporters. Or like just last week, I went up to South Bronx United, and I was like helping out with a photo shoot up there. And one of the kids who's now like 16 or 17 said that I came with Ethan White and this really amazing photographer. Ethan's an amazing photographer, but also this guy, Joshua Kesey. And I brought the two of them up to a camp for a practice for a movement episode. And we spoke to a class about how you can be a photographer. You can be involved in soccer in so many different ways, from photography to playing to like being on camera, production, etc.
Mhm.
And this one kid told me that we went to his class like in 2017, and he remembered it still. So it's like,
Damn.
you never know, like those little moments really do matter. So I think like for you to be conscious of that while you're playing is like really cool to see. And like even to go a step further and like talk to the kids, or like come over and like, you know, drop some wisdom on them. Yeah, you never know what that can do for somebody. Because I remember for me, it was like going to Oakland A's games as a kid, and like I remember Dave Stewart once talked to me, and I was like, wow, Dave Stewart. And I had all these things planned in my mind. I was going to tell him if I ever met Dave Stewart, and I just like went blank. I couldn't say anything. I was just like,
That's
oh
awesome.
wow.
Yeah, no, that's cool. It's a big deal to talk to someone you idolize or admire.
Totally.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like as pro athletes, you kind of tend to, you tend to minimize your success sometimes, because it's like at this point, like we've been playing soccer our whole life. At this point, like you play an 8-year career, I'm in my 6th year, and at a certain point you just kind of accept that as normal and you don't like celebrate it. Whereas like these kids like celebrate the opportunity to like talk with you or get a jersey or something. So it's like, it's important to remember, like, as much as this experience is challenging, we've talked about like the sacrifices you have to make, injuries, like bullshit with the business of it. Like there's a lot of like stuff that comes with it, but at the same time, like you have this like unbelievable power that you can instill into people, because society puts athletes on this pedestal and you have an ability to impact. And so I feel like I definitely did not lean into that until really the last couple of years, especially now being back in Oakland. It's like, it's crazy now just being at games as a player, just seeing kids. I mean, like we never had this shit. Like we never had that when I was growing up. So it's like, I feel like it's a bit of like a responsibility to like, you know, be somewhat of a positive representation of that, you know? Okay. We've had you for way too much time on your Sunday, but honestly, I want to thank you for this, because, you know, I was telling my dad earlier, but like you are one of few people who like, I feel like I'm very much inspired by what you do. I look up to you, but I also like would love to operate as like a peer. And there's very few people who like, when I speak to about some of these topics, like it feels like we're speaking the same language. And the fact that we both grew up in the Bay Area and have so many of these like overlapping things, that like just to have this relationship and to be able to have this conversation really is special for me. So I want to thank you for that. But we do have one last ending segment that we end with. I don't know if you've made it all the way through the episodes, where we end with eating, reading, preaching, and plugging, but it's just, you know, a fun way to end the show. But eating, reading, preaching, and plugging, what are you chefing up or eating to go over there in Brooklyn?
Okay. So like the chefing up part is not going great for me right now. It's like something I would say is a skill that I have not really developed, but I'm trying to learn a little bit. But I will say I'll give a shout out to a friend's restaurant here in Brooklyn. If
Yes,
that's cool.
love that.
Okay, cool. So his name is Randy, but the restaurant is called Leland's, and it's in like Prospect Heights, kind of near Prospect Park. So pretty close to where I live, and it's named after his grandfather, Leland, and it has some kind of like traditional, I would say like kind of Chinese influences, but is like all they make everything in house, from the butter to the bread to like they just opened up a bakery.
Yeah, that's all I need. I could stop right there. Bread and butter.
Yeah, but like really fresh ingredients. It's one of the it's an amazing restaurant, so I would say, and like casual and cool. Like he put on like the Euro final there, so you can like, he's got a projector situation for big soccer matches.
What's your go-to at Leland's? You just entered Leland's. What's your go-to?
They've got this juke soup, and it's like really kind of like, it's really spicy actually, but it's warm. So it's been like, it's forever cold in Brooklyn. It's never going to get warm. We had like 2 really nice days this week.
Jacket right now.
I know.
Inside.
Like this is cruel, but like the last 2 days were amazing. I was outside like enjoying it at the park, and then today it was freezing cold again, and I was like, damn, like I thought we were past this.
Yeah.
But yeah, that porridge will like keep you. It's like the perfect thing you want on like a cool day.
Okay. Good to know. Leland's, get the porridge. Okay. Moving on. What are you reading? It doesn't have to be like a book, maybe an article. You are very busy, as we've mentioned, all your endeavors. So maybe it's just some sort of text from whenever you want to highlight.
Your Berkeley professors are not listening, so don't worry.
I know. Yeah, I'm like,
you're not going to be judged.
Don't say you watch the Tinder Swindler, Calen. I'm there's this book here called The Compton Cowboys by Walter Thompson Hernandez.
Nice.
And I like just started it. I bought it a while ago. It came out a little while ago. But it's by this writer, Walter Thompson Hernandez, who's like also a soccer person. He actually played pro basketball. But then did a really cool, like he worked for the New York Times as a writer on this like surfacing series where he traveled all across like I think the world really, and was finding all these kind of like really interesting cultures. And one of the stories that he wrote about was this Compton Cowboys group, and it then got optioned into a book. So it's like a really, I would definitely recommend it. I just started it. I've had it for a long time. I like know Walter. I've gotten to meet him and got to like become friends with him a bit. But yeah, I need to finish it. But that's my eternal struggle of like just putting your foot down and like turning off Netflix and actually reading. So I'm getting to that.
Yeah.
Compton Cowboys.
Tough. Okay. Compton Cowboys.
Preaching.
What are you've done plenty of this in the episode, and you've dropped tons of gems, but if you were to leave our listeners or viewers with, a motto or just some words that you were to preach throughout your journey in life so far, what would you leave them with?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a tough one. I would say like something like I'm trying to focus on a little bit is like so many people, I feel like COVID kind of like, it's hard to like think about anything without that sort of framework now, but I think it kind of like one of the things I think about with it is like there was one of the first times where I kind of just like unplugged a little bit, and like I actually went through a phase where I really wasn't always creating and doing as much, and was more focused on other things like family and friends. And so I think like I'm trying to challenge myself to like, as I'm like starting back up, to like getting back out there and doing more work and starting a new job and doing all that, to like not lose sight of the family part of it. And like I feel like this podcast is kind of like a great version of that, in the way that you guys are doing both. And maybe I would imagine like, I don't know, it feels like maybe bringing you guys closer together in a different way too. So it comes through in the
it's pushing us
show.
Apart.
Well, yeah, I was gonna say,
No,
you're like,
joking. It's been a very good bonding experience.
That doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So if we survive this, we'll be okay.
No, it's
but that's family, right? Like it's a mixture of all those things. So I'm trying to keep all those things in mind as I'm like moving forward.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great perspective to have, and I need to remind myself of that too at times, because as we speak, it's a Sunday afternoon and tomorrow's Monday, and I still have a shit ton of editing to do for this previous episode that is supposed to drop. So now I'm here thinking like, maybe I'll release it Tuesday and spend a little bit more time.
That's okay.
Yeah. So I think that's a good perspective to have in.
Yeah. Oh, the other thing I would say is like, I'm really big, as you can tell, on like the kind of independent creative projects. And I think that like a lot of people are kind of waiting for their opportunity. And I found most of the opportunities that I've found have come from just doing it yourself. And I think it just says something about you, that it's like, whether someone's paying me to do this, I prefer it. But if not, like, I'm going to do this anyways. And I think like, I think it also can be really helpful to, as far as like, just to having an outlet, and then also to like work on your craft in ways where you don't necessarily have like some oversight or other opinions or constraints, even to like, because sometimes like it's actually great to have resources and all that, but sometimes that can also like hold you back and push you forward. And so it's like, I think the idea of like even creating without a bunch of money, or being able to like have to figure it out in a scrappy way, is sometimes like a really good way, a good like tool to put in your tool set.
Yeah, no, I couldn't have said that better myself. I think just with this podcast itself, like I've learned so much in terms of production, editing, promotion, copyright, like everything, making t-shirts, for Christ's sake. Like
I love that. I need one of those.
Oh, I know. Well, yeah, as now that you're a guest, you get a complimentary shirt. So
okay.
I got I'll have to dig through my boxes at my house and see if I have one from last season. But if in your size, because I've ordered way too many big sizes, like extra large that fit like 2 extra larges. Like I said, we're learning. Sizing is important, very important. But if not, I'll definitely have one for season 2's merchandise coming your way. But yeah, no, I think you said that brilliantly. Last one. What are you plugging? We've talked about a lot of the things that you are active in right now with 94 Til Infinity, with 4 Soccer Ventures. So there's a lot, but I'll leave the floor to you. What would you like to plug? Where can people who heard this conversation were like, wow, what a guy, I need to get more of Calen Carr, or what would you just like to plug?
Yeah, I would say, well, first, thanks for the opportunity to do that. I feel like for me, the podcast is kind of like I was just hyping up independent projects. So I got to follow through and push that. Cause I think we've only done 1 episode, but we're working on a second. And if you could subscribe to it and maybe leave a review if you like it.
Yes.
I think that's helpful, right? Do that for the Marathon Minute as well. But yeah, I think that would be that's where I'm really getting a chance to like do something that I think is different, or I'm trying out. Like, it's kind of like a testing ground for me, and like a place where I can really say whatever I want to say. So I think that's kind of, if people can subscribe to that or check that out, at least give it a listen. You might disagree, you might form a new opinion. It's on the World Cup in Qatar. We're going to probably do more coverage of that as we get closer to the World Cup as well too. So I think it's going to give maybe a different perspective on things that are happening around the World Cup, or that have been happening or are going to continue to be topics of discussion. So I think it'll be maybe an interesting place to follow along if you can.
94 Til Infinity.
Nice.
I've listened, loved it. I want more.
Yeah.
You left me a little hungry for more, Calen.
Okay. All right. I'm on it.
No,
this is
honestly,
the push I needed.
Yeah.
Sorry about
honestly, it is like, I listened to that first episode, and I'm someone who not only produces a podcast, but I consume podcasts. Like, if I'm doing the dishes, when I wake up, I'm making my coffee, I'm just listening to podcasts. And honestly, even if you were not here, I would be saying this. It was like one of my favorite episodes of anything I've listened to in a while. And just like the way you mix in like audio from someone's speech and the music and just all of it, the content itself, interview, it's really something awesome. So we are excited to watch it grow, and anyone out there listening or watching, you should check it out as well. There's room in the world for Marathon Minute and 94 Til Infinity to both flourish, but
don't listen to anything else.
Yeah, those two. And then,
that's where it stops.
Yeah, exactly.
It's really good.
I said it before, I'll say it again. Calen, thank you. This was incredible. And like we say, Marathon Minute is a family. So welcome to the Marathon Minute family. And, hopefully we just had someone on for the second time. Again, that's the episode coming out next week. But yeah, hopefully down the line, we can have you on again and continue checking in on what's next, because it always seems like there's something dope down the pipeline. So yeah, thank you for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you both. I love the show, and I got to come to a game, a Roots game this year. So Mike, if we can hang out in the crowd, maybe, hang out and, celebrate, cheer him on.
Absolutely, Calen. You got a seat next to me. I'm the guy that's nervous a wreck when Max is in the game. So I'll need your calm influence next to me. But that would be awesome to sit with you at a Roots game. Awesome. Hey, let me repeat what Max said, Calen. We're really honored to have you on. You're an amazing guy. You've accomplished so much in your relative youth. Max just spilled water on himself. He has a drinking problem.
The pod can be done now.